Hello and welcome to MedCity's Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Arundhati Parmar. At MedCity News, we have devoted resources to covering women's health fairly extensively. In fact, we have another podcast hosted by our reporter Marius Pharmaceuticals called Fem Forward. So in this episode of the Pivot Podcast, I thought, why not do a story on something that we don't cover very often, and that is men's health. And what's more masculine and integral to men's health than testosterone? My guest today is Shalin Shah, CEO of Marius Pharmaceuticals, that makes an FDA-approved oral drug that is approved to treat adult men with low or no testosterone levels due to certain medical conditions. He was recently invited to an FDA hearing convened by Commissioner Marty Makary so that officials could learn about testosterone replacement therapy and whether changes should be made in the regulatory schedule of this product. Hello and welcome to the Pivot Podcast, Shalin.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about testosterone replacement therapy and sort of go right to the beginning, I feel. Can you tell me a little bit about the history behind why TRT or testosterone replacement therapy is regulated as a controlled substance in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. So that actually goes back over 30 years now. So this happened in 1990. Congress actually went ahead and scheduled testosterone as a Schedule 3 substance. And this is mainly after a backlash around the Olympics. There was a doping scandal in the Olympics. And again, it was sort of a baby out with the bathwater thing as testosterone got roped into the broader class of anabolics. And what was interesting, though, at the time of this decision, the DEA opposed it, the FDA opposed it, as well as the AMA, right? So the Physicians Association as well. So again, it was very political back then. I think they were trying to sort of save face and protect what was thought as young, high school kids that were going to get interested in this. But, naturally, again, you look at the data and the regulation and what's happened, it really hasn't done its intended purpose. And frankly, at this point, has caused more harm than good.
So why do you think it's time to change that policy?
So again, testosterone is the only hormone that is controlled, right? Estrogen is a hormone not controlled. Insulin is also a hormone with anabolic properties, also not controlled. And coincidentally enough, things like human growth hormone, which are more potent than testosterone for the effects that we're talking about, also not controlled.
But
so I think, again,
sorry to interrupt, but those don't have as controversial a history as testosterone does, right?
Sure, but I think controversy doesn't equal science, right?
True.
So I think we want to be thoughtful about what is the metabolic role of testosterone. There's an androgen receptor on nearly every organ in the body. So it plays a physiologic process across our entire body. And the data is very clear. Low testosterone in a human body causes a lot of downstream negative consequences, right? Whether that's related to our glucose metabolism, whether that's related to cognitive function, cardiovascular health, bone, muscle, etc. So, when you have something that is that critical to have physiologic levels across the body, having a controlled status, is going to have a negative ramification on so many parts of that medical system that are going to drive people away from care.
So you mentioned some of the benefits, right? But there is a big concern from what I understand is the impact on the cardiovascular and the blood clotting system in our body. So is that risk overblown or is it misunderstood?
So two things there. Yeah. So the Traverse study, which was the largest randomized placebo-controlled trial ever done on testosterone therapy. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in June of 23, right? This came out, firmly showed there is no cardiovascular risk tied to testosterone therapy. And that also includes prostate cancer risk. So I think the data is clear now that there is no cardiovascular risk as you're, relating to blood clots and so forth. Like most things, there's physiologic and then there's non-physiologic or supraphysiologic. So, if you have too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right? And I think that frankly, applies to all hormones and most things across our body. And this falls into that category.
Okay, makes sense. So if you were to deregulate it, um, and I don't know that we have the political will in or whatever regulatory will in the FDA to do that, how would it be? How would it change things for the benefit of patients?
So mainly from a logistical perspective and then also a stigma perspective, right? So what happens now is a patient who may be a candidate for testosterone therapy, often they're having to discover this themselves, right? Because the medical system, traditional medical system has largely neglected this part of care. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why you see hormone therapy primarily delivered through concierge medicine, wellness clinics, TRT clinics, et cetera. They've kind of gone out that traditional system.
Right.
But again, patients can come back into that system, have this problem addressed comfortably, confidently from their providers. Providers also feel a lot better doing it because right now they are tracked in sort of national databases effectively when they're writing these prescriptions, right? They're
Right.
registered with the state boards and so forth. And then, you look at the pharmacy. So there are a lot of restrictions as it relates to dispensing in the pharmacy around a controlled substance.
Okay.
So there's also that level of logistic and stigma that can be removed
Okay.
from that process, which again, for a patient that's going through multiple hoops to get on a therapy that he or she may need,
Mhm.
you want to reduce basically every checkpoint that discourages them starting therapy.
Okay. Okay. But you don't, you talked about the doping scandal and all of that. Isn't there a chance of those becoming worse if it does become descheduled?
So I don't think so, because at the end of the day, this is still prescription medicine, right? So you
Okay.
still need to go to a provider. And this is
Right.
often lab-based, labs plus symptoms, but you're
Right.
getting a blood test to determine your levels. So
Yeah.
any competent provider is going to use those and think about their liability, right? So if you have a very high testosterone level, say I came in there with 1,000 nanograms per deciliter, for a provider to then give me testosterone, I don't think it's going to happen because they're thinking about their license and how they practice medicine. So you have these real checkpoints. It's
Okay.
not just, frankly, you look at GLP-1s and the ease of obtaining them today, right?
Hmm.
Via async telehealth. You don't even have to meet with a provider
Right.
and you can fudge your numbers. You don't have to get lab tests. I think that's actually, frankly, something that's abused a lot more than
Interesting.
what is testosterone.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned GLP-1s. I think in your hearing you talked about, you know, the obviously we all know the benefit of GLP-1s in rapid reduction of weight and of course other, good effects on for diabetes patients and obviously cardiac patients. But I'm curious because there are a lot of companies that are now talking about, okay, you're prescribing a GLP-1 doctor, prescribe my drug too, because it'll do A, B, C, D, and E. And I think in the testimony, you also said that given the rapid weight loss that occurs in many cases through not just fat loss, but muscle loss too, then you should prescribe, TRT therapy to help patients rebuild that, lost muscle mass.
Preserve the muscle, right?
Preserve.
Rebuilding is
Okay.
is again even more difficult, which is where most patients end up, right? The data
I
is
see.
very clear. 18 months post cessation of GLP-1s, most of the patients have regained all the weight that they've lost.
Right.
But
Right.
that weight would be fat, not muscle.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. But would that be just for men? Or would it be men and women? If you even in that ideal world when the prescriber is prescribing, a TRT with a GLP-1, doesn't gender matter?
So in an ideal world, it would not matter because again,
Interesting.
testosterone is a female hormone as well, right?
True. True.
Females make testosterone independently and they
Yeah.
also convert estrogen to testosterone. So I think there's a lot of data. The data is also clear in all the ways that it can support female health
Right.
as well,
Yeah.
right? From
Okay.
muscle to bone to cognition to cardiovascular, same things.
Okay.
So, I mean, the question is really why would we ignore half of our population
Right.
that can benefit from it as well?
Makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about your company, Marius. You obviously have an FDA approved drug in the marketplace. I want to talk about competition. I understand if my research is correct, and correct me if I'm wrong. There are two other approved oral TRTs in the United States. But the vast majority of the competition for you is not those companies, is injectables, which is how most people take TRT. So have you done any studies comparing your drug, oral drug, to the injectables? And if so, why would people switch from injectables to your drug?
There's a good question, and you're right. The majority of the market is injectables. It's not orals today. Orals
Right.
are just becoming better understood or better known, right? That
Mhm.
they exist. So a couple things. We have not run head-to-head trials against injections, but I will share some of the mechanisms that differ, right?
Okay.
So typically in an injection protocol, patients are taking an injection at a once a week or once every 2 week interval, right? So you have to think about what is most physiologic for a body. Our bodies make testosterone on a daily basis.
Mhm.
So a simple analogy that we like to use is if you're on a 1 week injection protocol, that's like waking up on Monday morning and having 10 cups of coffee for your entire week, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's really what sends patients on this roller coaster high, super physiologic high often, and then
Right.
a crash at the second half of their sort of dosing schedule.
Right.
Now you look at oral and products like Kaisertrex. So again, this is indicated, and right now this is indicated for just men with low testosterone due to certain medical conditions.
Right.
But we're taking Kaisertrex on a daily basis, and this is the way to most mimic your natural diurnal rhythm,
Okay.
right? So I think that's one basis that we look at. And then you look at what is happening from a supraphysiologic level. On an average, our patients are hitting 1,000 nanograms per deciliter as an intraday high, which is not
Okay.
super physiologic. And then it comes down throughout the day. So what you see, I think what's important here is the side effect profile.
Okay.
Now, data and studies show up to 66% of injection patients have elevated hematocrit levels, which will require blood donation, whether that's every 4 weeks or every 8 weeks.
Okay.
If you look at our phase 3 data on Kaisertrex, sub 2% of patients had an elevated hematocrit level, and those patients resolved when you decrease the dose.
Okay.
So nobody left the trial because of that. And that's a massive delta that you think about a physician or a patient having to think about elevated hematocrit levels and what is that impact, right?
Mhm.
Um, Also, if you think about things like LH and FSH, which are the signaling hormones coming from our pituitary, for Kaisertrex, they stay at the lower end of the normal range, versus often in injectables, they are zero, undetectable levels.
Okay.
Because again, your body, when you're going to sleep that night, on an injection, generally, your levels are high.
Right.
So your pituitary is saying, I have no work to do. We do not need to send these signals off. The testicles are often not working, and that's why you see testicular atrophy in injection patients as well.
I
It's
see.
very rare on Kaisertrex. We have not had that reported in our phase 3 data, and anecdotally, it just doesn't come up.
And how large was your sample in phase
So we
3?
had about 160 patients in our phase 3 trial.
Okay. Okay. So that's not a whole lot.
So I mean, it's in line with what testosterone trials are for FDA approved products
I see.
in
Okay.
in
Fair enough.
reality.
Okay.
So, but again, now we have thousands and thousands of patients on Kaisertrex. So anecdotally, we still we will get back from providers. I
Okay.
mean, I'll share a tidbit in terms of a paper that's to be published soon
Mhm.
by one of our providers. Um, if you look at a patient pre Kaisertrex, so they would be on injection therapy. Let's say this is about 75 patients. 20 low 20% had elevated hematocrit issues. That number cut in half on a transition to Kaisertrex,
Interesting.
right? So that's an apples to apples comparison because these are the same patients. And similarly, they had 20% of the patients had elevated estrogen levels and required anastrozole to control that conversion.
I see.
Less than half. Actually, I think it went down to almost 4% needed that anastrozole or estrogen blocker on Kaisertrex.
Okay.
So these are interesting points that I think we're starting to unfold
Hmm.
again as more of the population moves to oral. But I think it goes back to this physiologic rhythm discussion, right?
Hmm.
What is the most physiologic thing we can do or replace? And if we're able to mimic that, then our body should stay in a better equilibrium.
So I'm curious, and you explained obviously the clinical side of it. I'm curious about sort of your go-to-market strategy. If this is as good as you say it is, and your clinical trials are sort of pointing in that direction, then why not pursue an insurance strategy, whether government or commercial or both, instead of going this direct-to-consumer route? Because I don't know that, do you do ads on television? Like, how do people even know that this is a therapy that's available to me if
So
it's
we
direct to
do
consumer?
have a fair, I'll share a couple points, right? So again, remember, we launched this in 2023.
Right.
So if you look at the categories still, it again, heavily stigmatized and not viewed as essential by payers, right? So for us at our launch time, it would make sense to go cash where the benefits of the product
Hmm.
and the providers that you're dealing with also understand that, right? So they can adopt this much quicker than trying to convince a payer that, hey, look, I have a new product in a category that you don't love, and
Okay.
are you going to pay for it, right?
Right.
So we went straight to the consumer then, and I think that makes sense. As
But
just
let me stop you 1 second. The other two companies that are in the oral TRT space, they are insurance covered.
correct, that was their
Right.
base. So you also have to remember, so the main one, one of the other ones, they went bankrupt doing so.
Okay.
So I think writing was on the wall. They had 30 people in the field. It was an insurance strategy, and doctors are very, I guess rightfully so. These practices are busy. They're unforgiving. If that product is not covered, they
Right.
can't continue to write it and waste staff time
Right.
on this, right? They're
Sure.
busy. And
Yeah.
that was really one of the benefits for Kaisertrex out of the gate was we're saving your staff time. And we've
Okay.
made this at a price point that's accessible for patients.
Okay. And how much is that, if I may ask?
So on average, around $170 per month
Okay.
for Kaisertrex. And again, it could be a little bit more if you have the provider visit included, labs included, et cetera, like a subscription price, which you've seen with some of the
Right.
telehealth models.
Right.
Um, but no, I do think the future does hold a payer strategy
Okay.
because, again, as you saw with the panel and the regulatory tailwind behind testosterone, I think the broadening knowledge of hormone therapy, how
Hmm.
important it is for males and females, right? Again, the patient voice has been huge here. So I think when patients speak up, inversely, medical community does listen, and I think they do follow. So then again, I think as this goes back to primary care, then yes, an insurance strategy does make sense over the long term. So I wouldn't say I think for launch, it makes sense and what we're
Right.
doing, but
Hmm.
similar to, again, look what GLP-1 drugs have done. So what they're instituting now is what we did 3 years ago
Right.
because
Direct.
that
That's
that
like
was
direct.
that was
Yeah.
writings on the wall. Patients have sort of taken this back, empowered themselves. Look at the knowledge that they can get. I mean, a physician's always going to be necessary, but look at what like the power of the LLMs today and doing their research. It's not just Dr. Google anymore,
Sure.
right? Simple
Sure.
search and putting
Yeah.
together web pages.
It's
I think,
Gemini, ChatGPT, and all of the above. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
incredibly powerful and it's good for everyone, right? I think it's good for patients, it's good for providers.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so I think a broader access strategy is important to us as
Okay.
we think, there's 25 million hypogonadal men in the
Mhm.
US alone and 2 million are on therapy. That number can easily go to 10 million.
Okay. And then I'll ask a quick clinical question, then we'll come back to the regulatory aspect. Your product is approved in men that have low or no, that are not producing any or have low testosterone production. Does the label expand to include more people ever, or is it this, or is this it?
I think the label does expand, absolutely.
Sure.
Because so two things. One is it goes back to sort of an idiopathic hypogonadism. So you can have testosterone deficiency for whatever reason, right? Right now, there are very limited reasons why you can have this and be on label.
Okay.
Now, in 2014 and before, it was called idiopathic, was on the label. So just like you have high blood pressure or high cholesterol, a
Right.
doctor doesn't figure out exactly what's driving this, whether it's genetic, whether it's lifestyle, you get treated for that condition.
Right.
So that's really where I see the label shifting for testosterone therapy for the male population. And I do see a female testosterone on the horizon for, again, for females, an
Mm.
FDA approved version for a similar construct. I mean, again, this is a physiologic hormone. So if you are deficient in it, I think it's been very clearly shown that there are benefits to be in a physiologic range versus a deficient range.
And then let's end with sort of full circle, going back to the regulatory question. Do you think that this current administration, because they have, for lack of a better word, unconventional leaders leading various health agencies, do you think this idea of, removing it from such a strict way to monitor how these drugs are prescribed, do you think that might happen in the next 3 years?
So I do think there's a good chance of it happening.
Okay.
Like as you said, this administration has unconventional leadership, but look at what happened to female HRT, right? WHI was a flawed study that from the get-go basically caused hysteria around female hormones. And 2 decades of females have lost out on hormone therapy because of the flawed headlines that came out there. Any other administration could have changed this, but
Right.
this one did for the benefit of the female population.
And
Right.
we clarify that there was an elevated people thought there's an elevated cancer risk to women who went through HRT therapy, and that was a flawed study.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly. Right. So again, scared 2 decades of females off. Right. So this administration went and did that. So I don't like to look at it honestly as a political thing. I think this is truly better patient care.
Mhm.
And now them putting the same light on testosterone therapy, which has been stigmatized and faced these issues through the Controlled Substance Act and so forth. Now they are now they're taking actions to right that. But patients are the ultimate beneficiaries, and our country's healthcare system is a beneficiary. So
You would say that both for the HRT and potentially for the TRT, science is what is making those decisions.
there's the clinical data that can back it up, right? They're not shooting from the hip, right? The data
Right.
is there. And I think I've seen some amazing studies, even around diabetes and testosterone therapy and the prevention of diabetes or the remission of diabetes. These studies had not caught the attention that they should
Hmm.
because of this stigmatized category. So the
Right.
data is there.
Okay.
I think it's shining a light.
All right. Perfect. Well, Shalin, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
I appreciate you having me.